Men, how are we doing? We're great. Let's not talk about it. That was a joke, because the fact of the matter is, men are not doing too well, and nobody really wants to talk about it, least of all, men. Though it does vary from country to country, in the West at least, about 70 to 80% of all suicides are men. Suicide is in fact the #1 cause of death for men under 45. In the United Kingdom, 42% of men under 45 have considered suicide at some point in their lives. That's like almost half of all men. 93% of all deaths in the workplace are men. In the military, 99.9% of all deaths are men. Around 40% of victims of domestic abuse are men, and because of the unbelievable stigma around the issue of male abuse victims, some experts have estimated that there may actually be gender parity in this particular issue. It's just that men are drastically underreported. Some even estimate that when it comes to purely emotional, non-physical abuse, men might be more victimized. Although, of course, there is no data on this that would definitively prove it to be a thing. The issue is that really, even with the 40% number, though there are in the United States thousands of domestic violence and domestic abuse shelters for women, the overwhelming majority of them will turn away all men, even if they are young boys. The number of such shelters for men, who once again make up almost half of victims, has fluctuated over the years, but it's never been more than 20 over the entirety of the continental United States. Even accounting for all relevant factors, men are 15 times more likely to be imprisoned than women for comparable, if not identical, crimes, and tend to serve 12% longer sentences. Depending on the country you are in, anywhere from around 70 to 80% of all homicide victims are men. Around 70 to 75% of all homeless people are men, and, you know, that just happens to be one of the issues that in pretty much all countries in the world, even Western countries that are so very progressive, homelessness tends to be one of those things where the most victim blaming goes on and that fewest people care about, even though it is right there in their face every single day. What I just described are large-scale systemic issues where men are discriminated against because of their gender. This isn't accounting for like personal experience items that a lot of men will be able to relate to as I begin listing them, but of course these are cultural phenomena. It's very difficult to like statistically quantify them in the first place, and it's also rather difficult to get funding for research into men's issues. You know how relationships, any kind of relationship, will at some point have some level of emotional conflict? That's just a thing that happens. It's completely normal. You ever notice how for yourself there's this ingrained thought patterns, and also for all of the people around tends to be this ingrained thought patterns that the feelings of women override the feelings of men? In relationships specifically, the feelings of women are generally experienced to be more valid and legitimate than the feelings of men, especially by men. I am not saying this is like Machiavellian machinations by women, because it's not. Men are often the victims of childhood emotional neglect because society has a way of never validating men emotionally at any stage in their lives for any reason that isn't some arbitrary accomplishment. Even as we are told that we should be allowed to be more emotional, what factually happens is that we are told to be less emotional. Not so much by words, but by actions. Pretty much every young man has heard some variation of the statement, "Look, even if it may be true that you have problems because you are a man, we as a society need to focus on women's issues first. They're more important." And what we hear when somebody says this is, what you feel is irrelevant. Your thoughts, anxieties, issues, and problems are simply irrelevant, specifically because you are a man. You ever try to come out as a male victim of rape, especially by a woman? You can be lucky if it is even acknowledged as rape before your, let's be honest here, mainly male friends will laugh about it. In fact, there are some problems with some rape statistics in some areas because there are still places where the definition of rape is when the perpetrator penetrates the victim. Therefore, definitionally in many jurisdictions, men literally cannot be raped by women. Now, why is this? What do we call this phenomenon that victimizes men in this manner? Well, there has been one for quite a while, actually. It's a term that you may have heard before, and some people watching this video may not like me using this term because they have heard it misused many times before. It's the patriarchy. Now stay with me here, this will all make sense in a minute. I have often said that leftist terminology, most of the time, fails to be named something that is evocative of what it is actually attempting to describe. There are a lot of people out there, I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that it was most people out there, who think that patriarchy is a way of organizing society where all women are exploited for the benefit of all men. That is incorrect. That's right, a surprising number of people who call themselves feminists. I really invite you to go read up on some feminist theory, because they know what's up, and you're in for a rough surprise. Now, it is absolutely true, and let's not mistake this, that in a patriarchal society, men are placed hierarchically over women, and that is a problem. However, it also imposes upon them very strict gender norms that they have to follow, and if they deviate from those gender norms, they are punished severely. And the norms that are imposed tend to be extremely harmful. Yes, much like women, men are also victims of patriarchy. And the way that you fight patriarchy is by dismantling these gender norms. You can definitely say that patriarchy has been more overtly oppressive to women than men, and continues to be in many places in the world. And even in our modern progressive West, there are a lot of systemic challenges that women face in their everyday lives that men do not. But, and this is something that we really like to forget, men also have their own individual systemic challenges that only they face and women do not, the consequences of which I outlined in the beginning of this video. Here is my major issue, the fact that I have to acknowledge that yes, of course, women also face massive systemic challenges to be allowed to talk about men's issues and not be branded an incel pariah in lefty feminist circles should sort of tell you a little bit about the culture when the inverse of this is not true. Feminism has done a lot of very good things, great things even, to liberate women from the oppression of patriarchy. I am fully on board with those things. However, let's face it, feminism has done pretty much nothing to liberate men from patriarchy. And this is in spite of the fact that many who have actually read their feminist theory will readily acknowledge that patriarchy also oppresses men a lot. This is a statement then often followed up with, yeah, but feminism does actually help men. It is actively helping men, which institutionally and factually and systemically in society, it isn't. Encouraging men to wear dresses, if that's what they want to do, is nice. If you want to wear a dress, go ahead and wear a dress. You should be absolutely able to do that. But it's aesthetics. It does pretty much nothing in the way of addressing the major systemic issues that men face. In fact, the notion that you think that this is the main problem that men face sort of tells me that you are not very familiar with what it is like to be a man. Now, of course, you can tell people this, and sometimes the answer will be, well, make your own movement then. But of course, every time that does actually happen, it is always feminist organizations who use their big swinging dick of institutional power to block any sort of men's rights activism or men's issues awareness, denouncing it as patriarchal, right-wing, and fundamentally misogynist. Nowadays, many, if not most, of the people in active, organized institutional feminism are actively harmful to the cause of men's rights. Even saying men's rights in these circles will at best get you laughed at, no matter how substantiated it is with legitimate grievances. So even though in these past few years, I personally think that a lot of people have been individually waking up to the notion that, hey, maybe men are also a little bit fucked, institutionally, nothing is really changing. You could almost say that feminism, as practiced by the major feminist institutions in the West today, is, when it comes to the issue of men, patriarchal. Liberation from patriarchy for me, but not for thee. There are in fact those people who will take things like, for the statistic of 93% of workplace deaths are men, they will take this statistic and twist it so, oh no, this is actually misogynist, because it implies that the idea that women cannot do dangerous jobs, which is the only reason they don't do those dangerous jobs, is actually, that's an insult to the pride of women. Imagine people are dying, like actually dying in horrific ways. Like, have you ever seen a guy being just cut apart by a superheated metal that's being worked into something? Have you ever seen that? It's horrific. Imagine knowing that is going on, and the only thing you are concerned about is your own vanity. Academic feminists are concerned whether skyscrapers look too phallic, while men are literally dying of the patriarchy that they swore to smash. Now, a lot of women watching this are probably shocked, and rightly so. Just to be very clear, I see this a lot in MRA and incel circles, but the notion that women at large want to just turn it on its head and now start oppressing men, and that's all they're trying to do with feminism, that's not true. That's bullshit. Most women do not want men to suffer, in fact. There's like a big thing for them, because they're not insane sociopaths. There are, of course, some women who straight up just hate men and want to oppress them. We know this is the case the other way around. These women want to get even with the whole gender because of things that happened in the past that other people did, maybe things that happened to them personally by someone of that gender who did them a really terrible crime. And let's be honest, when it comes to the discourse, leftists, and especially feminists, do not do a very good job at disavowing these people. The only ones who are told, but that's not real feminism, are the ones who were hurt by this, not the ones who perpetrate it. Which is why I am not surprised that many incels and MRAs are of the firm opinion that that isn't real feminism is just gaslighting them, and behind closed doors, all feminists are actually buddy-buddy trying to oppress men. Very important to understand that, like any sort of complex of ideas, feminism is not some sort of institutional monolith, and it's very important for, MRAs and incels and all that to remember this, but it's also very important for people who call themselves feminists to remember this and not forget it whenever it is convenient to do so in conversation. Kill all men is not something posted by right-wing groups and conservative Christians. They're not the people saying this kind of shit. You might even make the case that what people see most of your intellectual movement is as real as it gets. When people complain about feminists that are not actually real feminists, you are totally correct about that. They are not true feminists, but part of that blame lies with you for failing to educate these people on the ideals that they proclaim to share with you. Usually, the people who will get educated on this are the victims, and the way this will happen is that they will be told, no, actually, your experience of being rebuffed and maligned for trying to voice your own concerns, that didn't happen. That's not a real thing. This is, in an almost literal sense, gaslighting and emotional abuse. That shit plays into one of the biggest problems of patriarchal gender norms for men, that male emotions are not valid. If you're a man, you feel emotions, that is your own personal problem. You should keep them to yourself. There's a major aspect of what we call toxic masculinity, and something that we also like to forget, as we are speaking of this topic at this very moment, is that the main victims of toxic masculinity are men, not women. Toxic masculinity is harm that men inflict upon themselves because of patriarchy. But of course, when it comes to the discourse, we much prefer to talk about women who become victims of toxic masculinity because we, as a society, do not really care about male victims all that much. Men are inherently disposable. This has been a tenet of patriarchy for centuries and millennia. Men have no inherent value as people. They are worthless until they have proven themselves in some weird and arbitrary way. And when push comes to shove, it is they who are expected to lay down their lives or endure horrendous suffering for the sake of protecting women and also men who were born into a higher social station than them. This was the case 100 years ago, this is the case today because feminism has failed to adequately address this issue. And nowhere does this become more apparent than what I like to call failed men. What people see when they look back at the patriarchy of the past is kings and generals, business magnates in fancy expensive suits with big carts or, private train carriages. That used to be a thing. We simply don't care or talk about the men who are not this. The peasants, who, surprise, surprise, was the majority of all men. Because in modern Western society, and pretty much in history in general and around the world, the group of people that is cared about the least of all groups of people is failed men. Now note that I am not saying most hated, I am saying least cared about. In 2021, institutional feminism cares much more about making more already millionaire women even richer CEOs than it cares about ending the homelessness crisis. When I say failed man, you probably have some sort of idea of what I mean in your head. Men live in terror of ending up failed men because of the expectations that are placed upon them by patriarchy. A failed man might not have a steady source of income by a certain age, live with their parents, be fat and unathletic, not have a sort of job that is considered prestigious for whatever arbitrary reasons. There's any number of criteria that can make you a failed man. But what it ultimately boils down to is that a failed man is any man that, for whatever criteria they do not fulfill, fails to be able to find a woman to make the fuck with. Because the value of a man in a patriarchal society is defined primarily by how much women like him. Not exclusively, but that is the main factor. And you are never safe. You could become a failed man at any point in your life. If you're in, say, your mid-50s, you just lost your business because of an economic downturn, you're broke, no longer have any money, your wife divorces you because of this, gets sole custody of the kids. Congratulations, you are now a failed man. Nobody cares about you anymore. Society, especially among older generations, views this as perfectly legitimate and acceptable. But if the roles were reversed, it would be a scandal. Imagine a man divorcing his wife because she doesn't make enough money, and then he gets the car, the house, the kids, the dog. But of course, this is even an outlier case. The biggest group of what you would call failed men are actually young men who just haven't had the lifetime to build something to, be able to show for themselves. They haven't proven themselves to society, especially in this economy. It is, to me, very unsurprising that many of these young men fall into right-wing rabbit holes and become incels and like really the very, very bad brand of MRA with absurdly skewed visions of how the world works. It is no surprise to me that they want to outlaw divorce or abortion or, always have it so men keep everything. Whatever thing that personally happened to them that they think would fix all of society's problems if it didn't happen. To them, these things are literally a way of preserving their value as human beings. Failed men are desperate. So desperate. And thus, they are very easy victims for exploitation. And people who will victimize them know this. Society doesn't see them that way. The left in general, and institutional feminism in particular, which, just to remind you, have their explicit purpose stated as being to smash the patriarchy, do not have any meaningful infrastructure to save these victimized failed men from spiraling into these horrific rabbit holes. They fall into these spirals of indoctrination and terrible, raging misogyny. And all they do is stoke the flames by unequivocally condemning failed men as evil and unsavable. I'm here to say it, and I am here to say it clearly. Incels are victims of patriarchy. Meanwhile, the people who have made it their life's mission to fight patriarchy are fighting incels. They completely ignore the systemic issues that lead to the existence of incels. They do nothing but malign them on their huge and influential platforms as terrorists and dangers to society, all the while offering zero in the way of actual, practical solutions to save these victims of patriarchy. There are some hypothesized solutions discussed in some theoretical circles that might maybe do something a couple generations down the line, but what about the people who are fucked right now? Well, who cares? Who gives a shit? They're men. They're expendable. Fucked up this bunch, probably gonna fuck up the next bunch. We'll just keep on improving. Just, toss them every time, they'll die off, and then maybe eventually we'll get it right. But let's be honest, it rarely even gets that far. Have you ever tried starting some sort of incel discourse in like the common leftist circles? You have to be very careful about that shit. Because you're probably gonna get branded with a bunch of buzzwords, the sole reason for the existence of which is to stop any sort of discourse from happening. And the vitriol is unbelievable. This is why, though I call myself a feminist when it comes to women's issues, I do not call myself a feminist when it comes to men's issues, and I generally prefer the term egalitarian. It doesn't matter what your theory says when the praxis looks like this. And if you are a feminist who is genuinely concerned with men's issues, which I suspect is actually rather a lot of them, if not most of them, the first thing you can do is clean up your own institutions. Get rid of the patriarchal structures that just suffuse modern-day institutional feminism. Actually go out there and smash gender norms for everybody. And look, it's true that patriarchy is not as oppressive to men as it used to be. Only by a bit, not by a lot, but it has happened. It's also true that people have been waking up more and more in recent years to men's issues, and this is a good development. But try telling a feminist, but a lot of progress has been made, and watch that be a legitimate argument, because, let's be honest, it isn't really all that much when it comes to current issues that are current. And I want to once again make clear, because I have to make this clear once again, because, people will, malign me with the same kind of vitriol that they malign everyone who talks about this. I am very much not opposed to feminism. This video was constructed around feminist theory. I am, however, against patriarchy. And we have to acknowledge that in this day and age, patriarchy is still very actively oppressing men. And many of the major feminist institutions of our time have become the thing that does the heavy lifting in that project. It doesn't really matter if the books in your academic ivory tower say, oh, patriarchy is also bad for men, when that does not really manifest in the real world. What we need in society is a new model of masculinity, one that isn't defined by patriarchy. And thus far, in the many decades that feminism has been at it, it has failed to deliver this. So I think it's time we stopped waiting. I personally will continue making and really just intensify probably the type of brand of like life advice for men and, you know, frankly, also women and, you know, gender non-conforming individuals type stuff, but primarily aimed at men. It's just that if you feel like you could use some of that advice, use it. I will continue to try to build a little bit more empathy and understanding for men's issues, and also understanding for women's issues in some of the circles of men who are rather far gone. I wish to create, you know, commonality, bridge the gap a little bit, because while we are fighting each other, the truth is, we are in this together. And if you are a feminist, or any other kind of ist, and you want to make a contribution to this project, please do. I invite you. Do it. I welcome you with open arms, because we are really in need of some help. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, unironically, smash the patriarchy. And see you around, cunts.